enthusiastic welcome. How many people here are students at Northampton? Raise your hand. So most. How many are here because of the Peace Conference in general? And this is part of it. Okay, quite a number of you as well. Yeah. I'm already getting the feeling that Northampton's a really special place. I mean, how many community colleges have departments of philosophy? You know, a lot of the major universities are getting rid of their philosophy programs. And here, it's this ideal of a liberal education is alive and well. I've been having a bunch of conversations already with some students. And the first girl I talked to, can't remember the word she used. It was something about the unreality of life and the routines and stuff. My own son, my oldest, he's 16. He talks about this, about derealization. You ever heard that term? Derealization. The feeling that you're walking through a movie of life and not the real life. And I'm looking around. Well, that's you know, when I hear, oh, I heard Charles' work and I quit my job, you know, I was like, oh. Because there's a part, like, so I inspire, sometimes my work, you know, inspires people to live in a different way. I get letters sometimes. I got a letter not too long ago from Holland saying, Charles, after I read your book, I gave away all my money. And you would not believe the riches that have come into my life since I did that. And so there's a part of me that's a little afraid. Because, you know, I'm conditioned as a member of this society to be afraid. And to think, whether it's about myself or about somebody else, will I be okay? Or will she be okay? She couldn't talk, you know, what about her security, you know? What about, like, there's a part of me that's afraid too. And that's the same part, the same mood that gets triggered in a lot of other situations. In fact, it gets triggered anytime you face a choice between what feels practical or necessary and what feels like the heart really wants to do that thing. You might feel it when you're choosing a major. You might feel it even when you're contemplating, should I go to school or not? Or how should I spend my time? So I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, and often it comes down to something that it often comes down to money. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about where that comes from, why it is, and why should it be that what's practical in economic terms so often conflicts with what we want to do to give ourselves the experience of joy, of service, of authenticity, of meaning, of living a meaningful life. Or why should it be that the map of a successful career, the things that we're generally told we have to do to be secure, to get a job, to have a successful career, why does it seem that these things aren't the things we really want to do? Why is it that there's a lot more money and security in accounting or marketing or business or something like that than in ecosystem restoration or in what if your passion is to help people from the juvenile justice or juvenile injustice system transition into adult life, and you want to work with those things? You know, like, why isn't there as much money in those things? And why is it, on a macro level, why is it that whenever you examine an environmental problem, that money is on the side of making the problem worse, generally speaking. Like, why is there money to be made in fracking and not money to be made in wetlands restoration? Why should that be? Because money, what is money? You know, money is just a social agreement. It's that ideally, at least, directs our energies toward things that are valuable to society. So one would think that there should be more money in wetlands restoration than in fracking. But that's not the case. So whether it's on a personal level or on a collective level or a global level, there's kind of the same dynamic going on here. So I'm going to answer that question, and I'm also going to describe how the deeper levels of that answer generate violence and war. Now, I know a lot of people have seen videos of my talks and stuff before, so I'm not going to do as long a thing as I usually do because I want to have lots of time for questions so we can take it further. But let's imagine that we're going to play a game of musical chairs, okay? So there's a giant game of musical chairs, so there's maybe 200 people here and 190 chairs. And we all start running around, and the music's playing, and then the music stops, and everybody goes for a chair. And 10 people are left out. What's that going to, and if you get left out, it's not just that you have to quit the game, but this is something you're afraid of. Really bad things will happen if you get left out. Maybe you won't get to eat, or maybe you won't be able to live anywhere, right? So it's bad. Well, what kind of personality trait is this going to bring out in you? What kind of perception of the world is this going to bring out in you? It's going to make you competitive. It's going to make you anxious. It's going to make you kind of enemies with everybody else in that circle, isn't it? Because they're your competitors, and if they get it, they get that share, you don't get that share. More for somebody else is less for you. And what happens if you are really a nice person? And yeah, you can have this chair. I'm not going to try too hard for this chair. I want you to have it. I like you. We're all in this together. We all have this feeling. We're all in this together. We desire to be of service. It's natural to be generous. It's natural to want to give. If someone comes and asks you for directions in your hometown, almost everybody's happy to give directions. That's a very tiny little gift, but it feels good to give that gift. And very few people say, my time is valuable. My time is worth $30 an hour. And if I take 2 minutes to do this, I'm out $1. I want compensation for this. The whole word compensation buys into a conception of work as something that you don't want to do. Economists call it the disutility of work. And so you need to be compensated for your time. Partly that's a product of the Industrial Revolution and the kinds of work that were available then. Anyway, back to the musical chairs. If the setup of the game suppresses certain aspects of our human nature and brings out the competitive, ruthless aspects. Well, the money system is quite similar. I'm not going to go into the whole story here, and there's a lot of details that could take the entire time, but basically, money is created as debt. It's lent into existence by banks, and at any moment, that means because the money that's lent has interest on it, as some of you may be experiencing with your student loans, that money is created, essentially created by the bank. They don't take it from somebody else's account and give it to you. It's essentially new money. But you now owe even more money than it's created. They give you a certain amount of money, it goes to pay tuition, right? Maybe it's $10,000, and then eventually, through the course of your life, you have to pay back $20,000, don't you? Well, but that's okay because you're going to get a good education and you're going to take that degree and you're going to get a job and you're going to make that $20,000 and more. You're going to make it from other people. You're going to sell goods and services, or you're going to work for somebody who sells goods and services. You're going to contribute to making products and services. And so you're going to earn that money from other people, and you're going to pay back that loan. The problem, though, is that all money is created the same way. So that means that every single person in this room has been given $10,000 and owes $20,000. And you're all trying to make it from each other, and there's not enough altogether. So you're in competition with each other, just like in the game of musical chairs. You're in competition with each other whether you like it or not. Now, the story's not quite that simple, okay? But I want to talk about one more part of the story. If it were that simple, then just like in musical chairs where 10 people got kicked out, if you all owe $20,000 and they've only been given $10,000 each and you're trading and buying and selling things, half of you are going to have to go bankrupt. Half of you can't pay it back. But that's not actually what happens, because by the time that $20,000 is due, the banking system has created even more money, enough to pay back all of those debts. So I've lent $20,000 each by then. But that comes with interest also. So you're still in competition for not enough money. But that's okay, because by the time that new debt comes due, I've created even more money, more and more and more. And so the system works as long as there's growth. There's endless growth. Well, where does that growth come from? What is that growth? Who am I going to lend money to? I'm only going to lend money to the people who are going to create new goods and services. For example, a business plan, and you're going to build widgets, a widget factory, and sell the widgets, right? You're going to find something that wasn't a good and service before, and you're going to make it into a good and service. So what we have seen over centuries is a progressive conversion of nature into goods and human relationships into services. The crisis that we face today is that it comes from, essentially it's a crisis in growth. It comes from the fact that there isn't that much left that we can still convert into goods and services. Not a whole lot more nature that we can accelerate the liquidation of. And not a whole lot more community, that social capital that we can convert into services. And this part, probably, I don't know if any of you have read about the state of the planet, and seen some of these documentaries. And I mean, most people are aware now of climate change. We're aware of the limits to resources and the limits to energy, to fossil fuels. And we're understanding that the biosphere cannot sustain a whole lot more destruction, and that we're running out of growth in that way. But what about services? That's not quite as well understood. But you may have noticed, I don't know, a lot of you are really young, but you may have noticed that we pay for a lot of things today that we didn't pay for a generation two or three ago. For example, in a lot of neighborhoods in Harrisburg, according to a local activist under there, she's from the quote bad part of town. She says nobody in her neighborhood knows how to cook a meal. Nobody cooks at all, but they purchase food that's been cooked by other people. When I was a kid, it was rare for people not to cook. Mom went to the store, she got raw ingredients, and she made dinner. So cooking was part of a gift economy within the family. Play was something that we rarely paid for either. Kids just went outside and played with each other. You didn't have to sign up for events, you didn't have to. Our toys were much simpler. For adults, exercise wasn't something people paid for very often. If you look at all of the big growth industries, most of them are things that we didn't used to pay for, and now we do. So gyms have been a huge growth industry. Daycare centers, huge growth industry. Food preparation, huge growth industry. Bottled water, one of the biggest growth categories in the last 30 years. We never used to pay for that. That would have been absurd, like, except for Perrier. Which was for rich people, basically. It was this kind of snooty thing. And so today, even like social interaction is something that we indirectly at least pay for. You have to be online to do it. And then there's ads and stuff like that. So even if you say that electronic media is a new thing, and it never existed before, actually you can also look at it as a conversion of the social function into a monetized function. And we can go on and on. Entertainment, 100 years ago, every small town had its own marching band. And it was a big deal. The whole town got together to create entertainment and recreation. And now it's something that we usually pay for. Now this trend is starting to change, actually. There are now things that we paid for 10 years ago that we don't pay for now. Music, for example. More and more news, where we pay a lot less for it. And this is also part of the crisis in growth. So basically, when growth slows down, the bank, don't have a lot of good lending opportunities anymore. So I can keep lending for a while, even though I secretly know you're never going to pay me back. But eventually, I can't do that forever. And what happens then is exactly what we're seeing today. A rise in indebtedness, polarization of wealth, and a breakdown in the financial system. And they're kind of keeping it going by shifting the debts around, lending more money to people who can't pay their debts so that they can keep paying, or to countries that can't pay their debts so that they can keep paying. It's called austerity in Europe. It says, you can't pay, you can't meet your bond obligations, that's okay. We'll lend you more if you agree to devote more of your income to paying the debt. All right, I'm not going to go too much more into that because I want to get into some deeper things that are more related to peace as well. But the basic, the basic picture here is that we're in a crisis that will not go away unless we can find some way to increase economic growth, to increase demand, to increase consumption. And this provides one of the answers to the question, why is it that the things that you really love to do are not where most of the money is? If your passion is not in selling something that wasn't sold before, if your passion is not in turning nature into a product, or turning relationships into services, or facilitating that process, then it's going to be real hard to find a job, because that's where the money originates. If you come to me with your business plan, and your business plan is, Charles, I'm going to restore wetlands, and I say, okay, beautiful. How are you going to pay me back? Even if I want to, I can't lend you that money from the bank. But if your business plan is, I'm going to pave over the wetlands and build a strip mall, and here's how I'm going to make the money, then I will lend you that. If that business plan doesn't excite you, then there's not a lot of money in it for you. And that's built into the economic system, built into the financial system. And we're reaching the end of growth. And therefore, a crisis that won't go away no matter how hard politicians try to stimulate demand and to find something else. Maybe in a third world country, maybe there's a place where people still do things for each other without paying for it. That's an untapped market. Maybe there's still a place where there's natural resources that, oh, don't do that. I can't see that. Turn those back on. Because otherwise, it's sort of like, I feel like I'm not really talking to people, you know? Thanks. All right. So, money, I mentioned this before. I said, what is money? Money is, I like to say money is a story. It's a system of agreements about symbols that say these symbols have value. They only have value because of our interpretation of those symbols. This story has powerful effects, as I've described, even pushing us to do things that we don't want to do. And it's not disconnected from deeper stories that are so deep, I would call them a mythology. Every culture has a mythology, and we're no different. We think, no, we don't have mythology. We have, science. We have real explanations for how things work. Mythology was what primitive societies had, but we now know the answers. Well, guess what? All the primitive societies said that too. They believed in their explanations just as much as we believe in ours. And what we call ritual, they might have, if they had such a word, would have called technology. In fact, a lot of our technologies are very similar to what we call rituals. For example, surgery. Well, there's no ritual in that, is there? Well, guess what? You go into this sacred chamber where, boy, this is really getting off topic, but it's cool. You go into the sacred chamber where everybody's wearing a mask. And that chamber is dedicated for this healing ritual. And you go in there, and a shaman comes and gives you a potion that is injected into you that alters your consciousness. The person who does the surgery has gone through a long initiation ordeal. And at the end of that ordeal, he does a ceremonial name change, where his MD is added, these symbols are added, and he gets a piece of paper written in an ancient language. Before he does the surgery, he performs a ritual ablution, a ritual washing of the hands, puts on the mask, and then does a ritual scarification on your body, upon which you're naturally healed. Okay. I'm not going to try to argue today that the efficacy of surgery depends on our mythology, the stories that we tell ourselves about how reality operates. That will be another time. But it should be quite obvious that money depends on the stories that we tell ourselves about it. As I was saying, and money has a lot of ritual associated with it too. Just look at the symbols on a dollar bill, or the little rituals of putting your mark on a check. Okay. Yes, so what is the deeper mythology underneath the money system? Every culture has stories that answer the deepest questions human beings can ask. Ours are, the questions are things like these. Who am I? What is it to be a human being? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What's important in life? What's the purpose of life? What happens after you die? Every culture answers these in different ways. And I'm just wondering for a second here, how many people, raise your hand if you're here because your professor made you come here. Maybe forced, or maybe it was kind of extra credit, it's like, right? And it'll be to your benefit. But if you had your choice, you'd rather be on Facebook or something like that. Not a lot of people daring to raise their hand. Okay, I just wanted to check. I find that universities and classrooms in particular are some of the worst places to lecture, just because you sit down in those rooms, at least I do, and I already feel a little resentment, just because I've been forced to be in those situations for such a long time. All right. Our culture says, this is not related to education, by the way. I'll tell you why in a minute. But our culture answers the question, who am I, in the following way. It says, who you are is a separate individual among other separate individuals in a universe that's separate from you. You are, well, it depends. If you're religious, this separate individual is a soul encased in flesh. If you're a biologist, this separate individual is the expression of your DNA that programs you to maximize reproductive self-interest. If you're a philosopher, maybe this separate individual is a mote of consciousness or a mind that either inhabits the flesh or is an outgrowth of brain activity. If you're a physicist, the separate self is a collection of molecules, atoms, particles that operate according to forces of nature. They all kind of agree on what a self is. Is that a myth? That that's what the self is? Or is that just reality that we finally discovered after many thousands of years of science? Is it myth or is it reality? Well, guess what? That question, the terms of that question, also are part of that same myth. Myth or reality says, well, there's this external reality out there separate from yourself, doesn't it? Okay, so it's almost hard to talk about this because without reinforcing the terms of that myth. I might be getting a little too philosophical for Tuesday morning, but I'm touching on it. You can see already how this myth that says, yeah, we're separate from each other, and because we're separate, your self-interest is not my self-interest. What happens to you, who cares? If you get sick, who cares? That is aligned with the money system I just described and the game of musical chairs. If you are sick, if you have a broken ankle, something, if you're slow, if you're not a very good competitor, that's good for me. I get the chair. I can outcompete you in the economy. We're separate. So our economic life reflects that myth right back at us. But that is not how it was for most human beings who have lived on this planet. Their economic life, most economies before money, all economies before money were gift economies. They weren't barter. Barter is a fiction invented by economists. I mean, it happened occasionally, but it was not the way economic life ran. Economic life ran by sharing. If you had more than you needed, especially if you're a nomad, why do you want to carry around more than you need? I don't need it right now. Like there's a certain, a kindergartner to understand this logic. I don't need it. Here, you have it. Right? It's obvious. Same with a primitive agriculturalist. Primitive in quotes here. If I have more grain than I can eat, why should I keep it and let the rats eat it? I can give it to somebody who needs it. Why? Well, because I like that person. Or maybe not just that, but I know that if I give generously, people will give to me too. People will take care of me because they know that I'm a contributor. They'll feel grateful. So in those societies, it should be no surprise that in those societies, the answer to who am I was different. It wasn't a separate self in a universe of other. It was a connected self, a self of inner being. The African, in South Africa, the word for it, Ubuntu. I exist because you exist. I exist through you. Or we speak of all my relations. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, calls it inner being. It's not just that we're separate people depending on each other and depending on nature, but it's that something of our very being is in you. We're not separate. There's something of your existence that's part of my existence. Haven't you ever had that experience when you look at somebody and you feel like we're the same being looking out from different eyes? Or haven't you had the experience of just reading about some misfortune and it hurts? Somebody else's misfortune, the other side of the world, and it hurts. Why should that hurt? Like, why should you care that the rainforests are being cut down? Why? Is it because that you're worried about the economic benefits that would come from rainforests that will affect your future? Or is it because it just hurts? Or when the species goes extinct. I remember when I was a kid, my dad told me about the passenger pigeons that used to darken the sky, flocks of billions, and they're all gone. I felt really sad about that. The simple answer is that those beings are part of ourselves. So of course it hurts when something happens to you. What do we call the feeling of somebody else's happiness being part of your happiness? And someone else's pain being part of your pain? It's called love, right? Is it any surprise then that a money system that embodies the story of separation is anti-love? And that it keeps us apart. The question before us, and this is what I write about, or one of the things I write about, is how can we build a money system on a different mythology? What would money look like, or what would economic exchange look like if it embodied inner being? If it embodied understanding that we're not separate? Because this is something that we're learning. We've already kind of turned the corner, actually. The science I was telling you about, the biology and physics that says that we're separate, that's obsolete science. You can no longer have a coherent biological view of the world that merely sees life as a headlong competition of selfish genes. Biologists are now understanding the role of cooperation and symbiosis in evolution and in ecology, understanding that if you eliminate one species, it doesn't mean that everybody else is better off because they have one less competitor. It means that the whole system is more fragile. It's not like a game of musical chairs. Musical chairs, one of us gets removed from the room, that's more chairs for everybody else. Not like that in an ecosystem. Even in physics, the self-other distinction is breaking. It's been obsolete for 90 years in quantum mechanics. Just kind of wondering which way to go with this now. Yeah, maybe I'll talk about, well, so basically what I'm saying is that the breakdown in our mythology is happening on many levels. The breakdown of the economic system is one level. Of our old scientific paradigms is another level. Maybe, the political system, medical system, educational system, all of these are in a crisis. It's telling us that our story of the world is not working anymore. And a couple generations ago, it was working really well. I'll tell you one more part of our defining mythology. The first part was the story of the self. The second, which says, who am I? The second part says, who are we? What is humanity? Why are we here? Where are we going? And it says, that back in the old days, we were these animals, basically, naked, helpless animals. But then we developed science, developed technology, and we were no longer at the mercy of nature, but we began to master nature. We began to harness natural forces, domesticate plants and animals, change the course of rivers, change the whole landscape, conquer nature. And the story says someday this conquest will be complete. And we'll have, synthetic food, computerized consciousness, space colonies. We won't even need nature anymore. And that was the vision of the future just a generation or two ago, that we will become fully independent of nature. And sometimes you still see vestiges of that way of thinking. What's the next advance in nanotechnology, genetic engineering that will extend our control? Why would we want to do that anyway? It's connected to the story of self and says there's this universe out there that doesn't care about you. So you better control it and insulate yourself from it and protect yourself from it. And this story is breaking down as well. We're not getting the benefits that we were promised by the conquest of nature. It seemed to be really working in the 1950s and the 1960s, one disease after another being conquered, lifespan increasing dramatically. Since then, no new diseases.